Okay.
Okay, so let me see.
Okay.
Yeah, we are live. Just Hey everyone. I think we are live now. If someone can just confirm on the chat that you guys can hear me well, see the screen. I haven't started sharing anything yet, but I will right now. All right. I think we are all set. People can hear me, which is good. And I hope they can now see me too. So, ready to roll. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next VirtualMuleys session. We really appreciate all you guys joining us tonight here. It's night and evening and day and all the plan. The fun part of online thing is like it's spread across the world. So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Manik Magar. I work as an architect at Avio Consulting. I do a lot of Mule related work, and I work for community too. So you may see me on the community. So for today, what we have is we have Shivam Khandelwal from API Zero. He will be talking about how can we use GraphQL in Mule 4. It's an interesting topic. I would like to hear more about it. So without wasting like a lot of time in my talk, which you guys have seen me talking so many times, so I will hand it over to Shivam. Uh, Sorry, 30 seconds before that. For all of you watching this for first time, the way this would work is like on the right hand side of your YouTube, you should see a live chat. So feel free to write your questions, comments, anything on that one, on that chat. Shivam will continue presenting his presentation and everything. At the end of the presentation, we will go into chat and start answering the questions, but that does not mean you should not ask questions during the presentation. I will be watching it over, and if something comes up, I can ask Shivam for any quick answers too. So feel free to drop your questions on the chat, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. With that, Shivam, you are going live. Your video is live right now. Why don't you
Okay.
introduce yourself, Shivam?
Sure. Thanks, Manik, for the introduction. So, as Manik mentioned, my name is Shivam Khandelwal. I work as a senior MuleSoft consultant here in Apicero, and I started my career with Java development. I had a couple of years in Java developer, and I found Mule very interesting. So, I mean, thereafter, I migrated to MuleSoft, and it's been years. I'm working in MuleSoft, and I'm liking it. I mean, every new release, Mule 3 to Mule 4, every new release is amazing. It's better than before. So yeah, so I'm liking MuleSoft. I mean, I'm working in from 4 years. So yeah, it's good to present a topic in front of you all, which is a new topic when it comes to MuleSoft. I mean, GraphQL, PHP, Java, all the other languages are using GraphQL actively. So yeah, Facebook coined this term GraphQL in 2012, and I hope you guys can see my screen.
Yeah, not yet, Shivam. I'm gonna
Okay,
start streaming your screen now.
yeah,
So
you can start that.
yeah, uh, it's going live right now, and it should be out there now.
Okay, so yeah, so I was saying that Facebook, coined this term in 2012 for GraphQL, and then they made this public. I mean, after GraphQL was public in 2015, a lot of different technologies like PHP, Java. In every technology, you'll find you can integrate that with GraphQL, and you can work with GraphQL on that. So Mule, I mean, recently MuleSoft created one simple connector with basic functionality of GraphQL, just kind of a proof of concept wherein they'll be able to use GraphQL inside Mule, and I think we have a good future with GraphQL with MuleSoft. So I'll start my presentation. So the agenda today here is, um, we'll see what are the problems that we have with existing technologies or existing type of integrations that we do, all the API led connectivity. There will be typical use cases wherein we will have issues wherein there is a lot of data being consumed, a lot of connectivity issues, many multiple API hits for just simple things. So we'll be addressing that. Then maybe we can switch on to what is GraphQL and how we will be integrating that with MuleSoft and Mule 4 to be specific. And at the end, I have a small demo for you all. I have deployed that in CloudHub as well, so we can test that at runtime. I'll guide you through the code as well. So yeah, so I'll take an example to explain the problems with existing integration style. Let's say Facebook wants to create a page wherein in that page you have three sections. First is the personal info. You'll have name, email address, phone number, and the company. This phone number is dummy, so don't try me. I mean, calling after this GraphQL demo. You won't get any answer from this number. So the second section will be post. So what all post that I have posted in like recent past, let's say in past 1 month. And the third section is album. You can have different sort of album of your photos or videos that will be there. So this page will have three type of data: personal, the post data, and the album data. Now we'll try to design a architecture wherein we will fill this page completely with a use case. Let's say for my data, will fill this page. So in the first request, what we'll do is there is an API which will only get the user details. Let's say we pass an ID that is one. We'll get a name, we'll get email address, phone number, and then the company and all. So we'll get this information, the first section of information, from a API which is users API, and we'll pass the user ID and we'll fetch this data, and we'll map this data to the first section. Now if we go into the next section, this is post API, wherein we pass the user ID, and will say that get me all the posts that he published recently. So for user ID 1, we'll get a lot of data, and we only need post either title. Maybe we don't need body for now, we just need title in this page. So we have this data. So similarly, so in the user section as well, we just need 4 details, but we are getting a lot of details which is not required here, but still we are getting that in user API. Okay, similar thing with post. We only need the post title, we don't need body, we don't need ID, we don't need user ID, but still we are getting that. Now there is a third API for the last section that we have on Facebook page, which will return only the album name. So we just need to map this album to here. That's it. Now what we'll do in normal scenarios, I mean, this is what we'll achieve at the end when we in username, email, company, post, and the title. So this is what we will achieve with this. So at the end we will design a, let's say, process API which will call all three system APIs. That is user, uh, first is user, post, and album. Then it will segregate all the data that it needs for the page, and ultimate process API will give this response. User has name, username, email, company, post, and all, and the albums will be beside, I mean, below this. So this is what we get at the end of the process layer. I've created a two layer diagram. I mean, for the demo I've just created 2 layer. Normally we have system layer, process layer, and experience layer, but for this demo I've created just 2. So here is the architecture, complete architecture. System layer will have 3 APIs, user detail, post, and album. Every API, all the APIs are going to database to fetch. I mean, it can be different database, it can be a different web service, it can be anything. For simplicity, I have taken one database. They will fetch all the details. So process layer will aggregate every single data to form that page details, the personal details, post details, and album detail, and at the end client will get that detail. So there is a problem with this architecture. The thing is, there is a lot of overhead. Let's say client only, I'll go back to the image. Yeah. So I mean, there is a change in plan, and I don't want all these details now. I just want first four details. So what will, I mean, in this architecture, what will client do is, um, it will query aggregation API. It will fetch all the details like this, all these details, and then the client will filter out name, username, email, and company. We don't want post and album. Manik, I mean, there is a some background. Can you go on mute, please? Yeah, thank you. So yeah, so what I was saying is, if client only need personal details instead of post details and album details, without changing the existing architecture, client will have to filter out all the data which comes after aggregation. And in normal terms, I mean, in normal context, let's say client only needs personal data, but aggregation API is calling all the three details instead of only the user details, fetching all the data, then you know uh, aggregating the data, filtering out some data, then sending to client, and client again filtering out some data. So there's a lot of uh, overhead on process. Manik, you want to say something? Okay. Okay. So yeah, so what I was saying is, client will have a lot of overhead. When user post album detail will be coming here, aggregation API will filter the data, and then client will again filter the data to fetch the only this four details. So it's a lot of data consumption. It's a lot of unnecessary calls. Like, if client needs only user details, why to query all the three requests to give the client all the data, and then client will filter out. So the one thing is, there is a lot of filtering logic in each layer, in process layer and at the client layer. And second is, there are a lot of unnecessary calls which will slow down the ultimate process. Again, there is one more point, that the data flowing from the database till the client is a lot of data. These three data will flow from here to here, aggregation API, and then aggregation API will filter and then send it to back to client. So the bigger the size of data is, the more processing time it will be taking. So this is the problem with current architecture, though it is a perfect architecture in every context. But there will be some integrations, there will be some use cases wherein this architecture won't be that efficient, that as we want. So what we do is, we'll just replace that aggregation API with GraphQL. Now I'll try to explain what GraphQL is. So client will only request, um, there will be only one endpoint, which is GraphQL endpoint. We call it as GraphQL gateway as well. That will be exposed to client, and now the client will say that I only need user details. So GraphQL will be intelligent enough to just fetch user details in that call. GraphQL won't call post an album. Similarly, if client wants post details and user details, so client will say, GraphQL, give me user details and post details from database, and GraphQL will do that. It won't call other API at all. So this use case, there are only three, but there can be hundreds of APIs that will be calling. Let's say, for I mean, take an example of a comparator website. I mean, when we take insurance, there will be a lot of comparator websites which will hit all the insurance companies, and then filter out, and then they will list out all the data which we got from the companies. But let's say we have a GraphQL layer at that level, and client will only say that I need these four details. So without any filtration, without any logic, only the details of those four companies will be fetched, nothing else. So there will not be any overhead of data, there will not be any overhead at time. Okay. Yeah, so this is how it will work, at the end, wherein a web app or a mobile app or any other app will directly call GraphQL as a gateway, and then in turn GraphQL will internally segregate depending on what client wants. Client only wants specific data, then GraphQL will only fetch that data only. It will not fetch other details. So that's all I had for the presentation. I'll quickly try to explain the code as well. So before going to the code, Manik, you see any questions that I can address? Theoretical questions. Manik, can you hear me? Okay, so I'll take that as no. Okay, I can also read the questions. In this case, is GraphQL doing what would otherwise be done with data weave? No, no, no. So,
Yeah, can you hear me?
yeah, I can hear you now, Manik. Yeah, so I think there is only one question. So that is data weave question. So to answer, kind of a gateway, and data weave is kind of a filtering or mapping or something of that sort. So you cannot change data weave at runtime, right? You cannot say that, oh, I only need this, and you'll have to make a lot of big queries, and data weave will consider of a lot of if and else statements, so that they will be hitting the exact URL. So it's not filtering of data, it's filtering of request which we want to hit at the end. So you can see it here. It's not about data which is coming in. We will always be filtering the data. Let's say in this architecture, we will use aggregation API. I mean, we will use data weave inside this to filter these three datas. Let's say in mm, 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 yeah, in this first case there are a lot of information, but we only want these four, so we will do this kind of mapping with data weave. But when it comes to API, which API to hit, that decision will be taken care by GraphQL. Here it will be a gateway. It will try to read the input which client will send, and it will then give a response. So I'll directly jump into the demo part. So I have these two APIs that I've developed. This is GraphQL demo, and this is one user's API which will have three endpoints. I mean, instead of creating three APIs, I created one API with three endpoints, just for simplicity. So in this, we will call user service, post service, and album service. So I'll first give the demo, and then I'll explain the code as well. So this is deployed on Cloud Hub, and this is the a pretty little UI which is created by GraphQL people. I mean, it's kind of a console wherein it is called as GraphIQL, and we can just send requests and get the response. It's kind of a postman for GraphQL. So yeah, so this application is deployed, and it's very simple to code as well. So it will also give uh, inputs by their own. So ID one. Okay.
Hey,
Yes, Manik.
it's little blurry. Can you zoom in, please?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you can zoom in on the code, Control plus. Yeah, keep zooming in. Yeah, I think that's
Is that good?
Let's see. I think it's good now. Is that? Yeah, it's better.
Okay. I
Yeah,
hope you guys can see it right now.
yeah.
Okay. So yeah, so what I was saying is, you want to fetch user details and just the name from the API. So there are three APIs deployed, but I only want name. So what I'll do is I'll just fetch name. So for ID one, if I fetch name, then the name is this. So client this x I mean assume this part is the client, and the client is requesting to GraphQL gateway that I just need user details, and in the background our GraphQL gateway is routing this incoming request to one of the three APIs, which is user API, which is here. So this part in the system layer, just user details is getting called. So I got name. What else? I want let's say email address as well. So I got email address. So it's like a dynamic API, one stop shop for a client, with just one endpoint. This is the endpoint, and with this endpoint, they'll just append a query to fetch all the details that they want. And in background, only minimal APIs will be getting called. Let's say phone number. I need phone number as well. Okay, now that's it for user. I need something else. Post, sorry. Yeah, so I need post details of this particular user. Okay, so I'll fetch the ID. Now I am not interested in ID. I need title. ID I have. Okay, so when I send this request, I just get the title, which is a lorem ipsum text. So don't worry about reading it. So so basically the bottom line is the client will only get what they want. They won't get any random data, and then they'll apply a filtering logic. And this is fast as well, because we are hitting what the client wants. We are not hitting everything at once, then filtering out the data. So this is the bottom line of GraphQL. That is why it is supposed to be the faster than normal REST architecture, that we have a API led connectivity for specific use cases. You cannot plug GraphQL in all the use cases present in the world. There will be very specific use cases wherein there will be a lot of data changes on client end. You'll be calling multiple endpoints throughout, parallelly getting them the data. So basically, whenever you are using scatter gather kind of architecture, when you want to scatter all your requests, gather some information, and then do some massaging on that data. So at that point of time, you use GraphQL. So in any scenario wherein you need to hit a lot of things to get a little data, so only the important data. So at that time, I mean, so just for understanding, so what SQL does for database. So in SQL, you say select ID, name, and surname from this table. So you will only get ID, name, and surname. You won't get all the data and then you'll filter out. No, you will only get what you requested. So this GraphQL is kind of a SQL for APIs. Instead of database, it's a kind of SQL for database, for APIs, wherein you will only get what you want. Yeah, so this is what I had in the demo. mm, in the use case, I had albums as well. So when you hit albums, you get albums at the end. You get only ID. No, I don't want ID. I want album name. Okay, so you'll get all the post first, and then albums at the end. So this is how we work with GraphQL. And don't worry, I mean, GraphQL, I mean, it's not necessary to use only the GraphIQL data, or the interface to query GraphQL API. You can just make it as a string. I'll do that right now. So I'll just skip the escape characters. uh, This is the same URL that I am using at the interface level. Just I'm using the direct URL instead of sorry, this one. I'm using the direct URL instead of the graph IQL, which is an interface. So here there is a technique of sending this data. So instead of directly pasting that here, we have a query wherein we send uh, the string value of JSON, and then if we'll send it, we'll get the same data that we got there. So it is easy to integrate with APIs as well. So I mean, we have we if we can do it with Postman, then of course we can do it with any API, any MuleSoft application as well, at the client side. So this is that simple.
Hey, Shivam,
Yes, Manik.
can you quickly zoom on this one too? Just
Mm,
is it possible? I think
uh,
control plus, or that should be, yeah, zoom in. Yeah,
I'm trying Control Plus. Yeah, it's
yeah,
slow. Yeah, it's slow.
just because sometimes it's just appearing a blur there. Yeah, it's good. It's good. Thanks.
It's good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was explaining, if we pass a string value in a query like this, we will get the exact same result which we got from this here. So it's exactly the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. Manik, we have any questions before we
Uh,
deep
yeah,
dive into the code?
there are a few. So one is Whitney's asking how much faster would GraphQL work as opposed to an aggregator API in the process layer?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. So it depends on the kind of data that you are fetching. Let's say I'll give you an example. Okay.
Yeah.
So Manik, you're saying something?
Just repeat the question because I'm not sure if my voice is going there. So just want to make sure you repeat the question and then answer.
Okay, okay. So the question is, how much faster will be GraphQL API in terms, when compared with the normal aggregator API. So yeah, so it depends. We have learned best case, worst case scenarios, right? Time complexity and space complexity. So it's similar to that. Let's say a client wants all the data which an extractor API will give, but aggregator API will give. So it will take the same time because we are hitting three endpoints, we are fetching all the data, and then we are sending back to client. So this will be the same result for both. But when clients want specific data, and if the client requirement is, we want more data than it is actually coming, so in that case, GraphQL will work better. If I need only the name,
Okay.
so it will always be faster. I'm sorry, I missed some syntax. Yeah, I missed. So it gives you the problem as well, where there is a syntax error. It is line number 5, column 1. I missed this curly brace. Yeah, so this will be very fast. But when we compare with this, so if we fetch everything, this will be normal complexity. So it depends on client what they want, and when the client needs change, the performance of GraphQL will change, but it will not be worse. It will always be either equal or better than REST API in particular scenarios, in particular use cases, because we cannot plug GraphQL in all the use cases. For the use cases which fit for this kind of architecture, it will always perform better than REST API, and there is a reason behind that as well. Uh, it is only hitting the data that they want.
Okay. Okay. The next one is, can we define all these GraphQL endpoints with RAML, or it's something else?
Yeah, so the question is, can we define GraphQL endpoints with RAML or something else? So I'll come to that in my demo. In my code walkthrough. But no, we have a schema file wherein we define a schema that all the members involved in any API will be present there, and you cannot query anything out of that. So let's say you have 100 API. So you configure all the data present in 100 APIs at once in schema file and just forget it. It will always return all the data that you want, like 4 data or 5 data, hitting 5 URL, 6 URL. But you cannot hit any other URL which is not mentioned in the schema file. I'll guide you through the schema file as well.
Because the next question was related, like how do I expose that schema to my users?
Yeah, so there is, yeah, so it's kind of a handshake. Let's see. Yeah, I hope you can see this screen fine. You want me to increase the font size, or it's
I,
fine?
I don't think on the studio. Can you increase on the studio?
I think people used to increase, but I've never tried that.
Yeah.
It's okay. Can you guys see the screen?
Yeah, it's visible,
Okay.
little blurrish because of the small fonts.
Um, there is some technique.
On Mac, I know how to zoom screen, but I think you're on Windows, so I don't know.
Yes.
Go to just general font.
I think I'm almost there of increasing the font size.
Yeah. It
Yeah, I think, yeah, I
is
found.
here.
Yeah. Can you see the font now a little better?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. So yeah, so this is a schema file.
Yeah.
I'll try to explain it. It's slightly difficult to understand in the very first look. So this is query. This query is this portion. This is what a query is. This is a query. Okay. So in this query, we will have user and we will give an input as a string. So yeah. So this part is this. It's like a parent, wherein we pass our data to GraphQL, and then we get all the details related to that data. So I'll give you a dynamic kind of view. So this gives this name, right? So the second will give a different name, so IDs will be dynamic. I can fetch all the dynamic details. So this is kind of a query parameter or path param kind of thing for GraphQL, and we can have a hell lot of other techniques to send data. But in this graph, I mean, in this MuleSoft connector, we have some certain restrictions. That is why it is not published yet, so it's still a beta version. So this query will be a parent query. Now you will do, I mean, things like that. If it is another type of data, then parent will have this user, and now user will have these details. So user will have name, username, email, address, phone number, and then you have a collection as well. So this is how you denote a kind of an object. So this is an object post. So we'll see post. Where is this post? So this is kind of a type, and post will have three things. It is like the maximum things that you can have. If you want to filter, you just pass title, and then you will only get title. But for schema, you will have to define the schema. And this is a human readable schema. This is kind of a hierarchy wherein you got user. Now you want to see what is there in the user. You have this. Now you got post as a complex data type. You will find what is there in post. Then you go here in type post. Then you get basic data types. Similar with the albums. So for small use case, this is a short and sweet schema dot GraphQL language schema. I mean file. So this is the schema file that we have. As the data will increase, the file will also increase. But this is a kind of one-time investment, wherein when you define all the APIs and when you define a GraphQL gateway, you provide this schema with all possible outcomes that a query can have, and then you just forget about it. You can just dynamically call the data however you want. So this is how it works.
Okay,
Any other question, Manik?
there are more. I mean, if you, do you want to have the demo first and then get to it, or you want to continue the questions
So
first?
the demo and all is fine. I'm left with a code walkthrough and some details about GraphQL, so I can take questions. Yeah.
So, does this work with proxy? That is the next question. Two questions. How does this affect with the proxy or the proxy APIs?
No, no. So proxy won't affect this. So the logic of proxy is whenever a request is coming to proxy, proxy will do some kind of a validation. It will have policies and all, and then it will reroute it to the implementation URL. So RAML won't be attached to it. There will not be any schema. So proxy will be kind of a pass through. If we have policies, let's say rate limiting, client ID enforcement, and all, will have there, but the request will directly route it to this API, this implementation URL, and it will work fine. So I'll try to explain you a little. So we have this query, right? So this query will come to our API in this form. So we'll have a query, and we have the query in a very straight line in this form. So proxy won't be affected because the implementation URL will always be same. So it will route all the data which is coming in a query parameter called query, and it will send that to the GraphQL gateway. Now the gateway will decide what needs to be done, how to filter data, and then it will fetch all the data back. So
Okay.
I'm sorry, the question was, will proxy be effective? I mean, what is the role of proxy here? If there is a proxy, will GraphQL work? Yes, of course. So proxy won't affect this.
Okay. Uh, uh, will you be able to share that code with everyone?
Yeah, sure, sure. So yeah, before going to that, so this connector, right? I'll show you the code as well. Yeah, so we have this connector, which is called as GraphQL connector. They will have two things. One is field resolver, and another is router. So router, what router will do? Router will fetch the all the data which is coming in GraphQL. Then it will send all the data to free field resolvers. And these field resolvers, let's say I only need user field. So what we're passing here user. So all the data related to user field, like this data will be going in this flow. It will I've used a small groovy kind of script to get all the fields in user and then send that request. So now when a router will say that there is a post, there's a post request. So all the data, the details here will go into the post flow. This is post flow. Our query resolver is made for fetching all the post related incoming requests. So that is why I'm saying, let's say there are three endpoints with which give three different results. So this router will route all the required fields to the specific endpoints which are required. Let's say a user don't want, I mean the client don't want album details, so the data will flow only in this flow, and the post flow. The data won't even go into the album flow because there is no field. So this request will never get called. Only these two requests will be called. So this will reduce the data which is coming from this request. This will reduce the time which takes this request to go and fetch the details. So it will save a lot of things.
Okay. While you are on this thing, so does that mean the GraphQL field resolver or the router is equivalent to API Kit router? That is one of the question. How does is it like similar to what API Kit router does to REST?
Yeah. So the question is, what is the difference between router and API Kit router? So API Kit router will validate the incoming request in terms of data which is sent to a request, and see if that data is correct or not. The the normal API Kit router will only see that what request a user wants, and it will route it to a particular flow. But in this case, it will intelligently check what all requests they want. It will intelligently route to only those requests which user wants. I mean, only the user and the post request. So, and this will run in parallel, and all the data which is coming out of that will be aggregated in router. So API Kit router is not for data splitting or fetching the data and aggregating that. API kit router is for getting, I mean, checking the incoming request. It is if it is as per the raml or not, and then sending that to particular flow. That's it. It's kind of a router. But here it's routing as well. It is resolving with this GraphQL fields in parallel, and then it is aggregating the data as well depending on the schema. So we define schema here. See,
Mhm.
in this GraphQL router, we define the schema. So it completely works as per schema. What is the design of schema, how the request will be coming, and how the response they need. So it works very intelligently. So API kit router is only for one kind of a request, and it is not very intelligent. But here it is routing as well. It is making things in parallel. It is resolving all the data which is coming in, and then aggregating that data as well. So yeah, so it's that different.
Okay. And this connector is it available? Like, how did you add the connector in
Yeah,
here? That's
yeah,
the
yeah.
next
So
question.
it's a good question. So question is,
So I think,
where did you get?
Shivam, I think I added myself. They can hear, so you can
Okay,
continue.
okay.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, so question, the good question. So we have this connector here in MuleSoft Labs. We have not published that. I mean, I have not added this connector. I just found this online, and I think Juan created this. So we have this here. We won't have, I mean, we'll have to add it in our Eclipse or in a folder, and then we'll have to install it in our local. So I'll tell you how can we do that. A lot of instances running, so
Mhm.
my local
So
behaves
it's
differently.
not available on the exchange right now. You're saying, right?
No, 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 it's not available. So we just need to go here. It's a kind of a connector. It's a kind of a custom connector code. We just need to run it mvn clean install. Now once we do this ambient clean install, it will install the router in our local. It won't publish it to any exchange or something like that. And then at the end, I'll let it run. Yeah, so here if you'll see, you just have to add this dependency in your pom.xml, and you'll see the router here. Yeah, so I'll show the pom.xml as well. Mule scripting, yeah, this module, GraphQL module. We just need to add this dependency. So after this runs successfully with all the maven commands, all the munits and all, it will generate um, a jar in M2 folder. I'll try to go to that folder as well, so that everyone is aware of that. Repository or MuleSoft. It's not org MuleSoft, it's something else. I'll check it. I think it's com MuleSoft. Sorry, my bad. Services. Yeah, this GraphQL module is added here, and you can see it here. It just got added. It's the
Mhm.
latest timestamp here in India. So we have this jar here in our local, and then what we'll do is we'll just import it, the dependency here. And yeah, so as soon as you import this dependency, you will see these two connectors available, this in the palette.
Okay. So, and I think two questions were one about the unit testing, the GraphQL
Yeah.
component, and then how does auto discovery works for if you are using it.
So currently I've not tried auto discovery, but it is the same with auto discovery. You if you have a proxy and if you have an implementation URL, you just have an auto discovery ID, you link that. So it should work. I don't see any problem. It's just a normal URL. It's nothing fancy. If you try to see, it's an HTTP connector. I mean, it's an HTTP API. You can do whatever you want with this API. But what you do with MuleSoft, there are just couple of connectors added inside the API, so it won't affect any of the Mule functionality. It will run very smoothly. As you just feel that, you just imagine that I will open Notepad. Yeah, so we have www.google.com. We have this API and we work on this as well, right? The only thing which I'm doing is I'm adding a query parameter and passing some random values in it. So this part is what runs the application. This is what our GraphQL router and query resolver will be using internally. So it's perfectly a normal HTTP endpoint, HTTP API. And I mean, you can do a lot of things as well. You can have a RAML as well on top of this API, and then inside that RAML you call GraphQL. I mean, you can play with it, but this is kind of a replacement for your experience layer, which we call as a GraphQL gateway.
Okay.
Manik, I think I missed the second question. I think I asked only one.
Yeah, the second one, first one was about the unit testing. So now I have all the flows. How do I
Yeah,
test all
it's
these things, right?
it's very similar. I've not tried it, but we can generate munit test cases. I don't know what munit will do with GraphQL. If do we have any connector or something like that, but we can mock it, I feel. So we can mock this GraphQL and test other things.
Uh, I think it will be same for sources. It will be difficult, but
Right.
or where you have those as an operation,
Yeah.
you can go from there.
Right. Right. Even this connector will also work fine in munit. You just pass a request and then you'll just check the output of this router. So it will be a combination of everything. So yeah.
Uh, so another question is, not sure if unlike API Kit router, I am guessing GraphQL router doesn't do any validations based on RAML. Is that right?
No, we won't be able to use RAML here. I mean, I don't think so. We can create this listener as a RAML endpoint and then do all the validation there and then route it back to GraphQL router, but that will be too much because GraphQL router is actually managing all the what do you say, the validation. So if we enter something bad, I'll try to do that. This, it will actually manage at the endpoint level. We'll get this message that this is not a valid type, it is undefined. So it is kind of a RAML only. It is
Okay.
kind of a schema. It's a different thing. That's it.
Okay. Okay. I think it's very interesting question. So you said connector is not on the exchange, right? And the question
Yeah.
is, since it is not published on exchange, it is only on the like GitHub.
Right.
How do you think it's like a good to use in production? Or
Right.
I mean, I don't think it's anything official from MuleSoft. So
Right.
guys, don't take it as an anything from official from MuleSoft. But what do you think? How stable it is? What is your
Yeah.
experience with that?
So yeah, so it's a very interesting question. So yeah, so people normally ask such questions that you don't have this published in Exchange. How can you use that for a client, right? We cannot use this. So this is GraphQL page. They have a lot of things here, but all the things are not present in the connector. So it is like a half-baked connector as of now. There will be a lot of operations that will be coming in. We are only querying as of now. We can do mutations as well. Mutations is an update. Instead of all the get request, you post data as well. So if you see here with this thing, I am actually sending a kind of data, right? I'm not just fetching the data, I'm sending the data. Just I need an ID called, I need data with for ID 3, which is actually kind of a, a data sending mechanism. So there are a lot of things. Mutation is one thing wherein you send a lot of data. I'll try to open it. Yeah, so this is mutation. You want to update something. Yeah, let's say there's a something episode or something, you want to give a review to that, and you send this variable inside the request like this, code create review and pass these variables, so that will be reflected in the actual data. So this is what we do with GraphQL. But all this, I have not tried that on my local, but I think it is very complex with these two connectors. There should be a lot of connectors adding. So I had a discussion with MuleSoft team as well, people from MuleSoft COP and COVs. How can we take GraphQL to a different level, as it is as of now. It's been a couple of years when they developed this beta version, but it never went ahead of that. So yeah, so we are in discussion with MuleSoft, and hopefully we will get something. And this is an open source connector, right? So here is the all the code related to GraphQL. So this is a custom connector. A lot of companies develop custom connector as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
One quick thing, maybe zoom. Okay, you're out of that page. Wherever possible, if you could zoom and switch
Yeah.
between windows little slowly, because I think it's causing little blur. It's not good, but yeah. So yeah, that makes sense. One more question is not the question. I think a couple of times came there. So we saw the GraphQL connector there.
Hmm.
Can you show the configuration of the GraphQL connector? How do you configure? How do you put schemas on it? And how does it actually resolve fields, or how does it filter out what is not asked for?
Yeah. So as I said, this is the only place wherein we defined all the kind of structured data that we can get from the client, from the end user. And if the incoming request is not in this form, it will fail. It will directly give an error that you need to make it a better request, like see n is there, so it is not part of the schema. So it directly sent an error that it is not part of, it's an undefined field, it's not part of this thing. So what we do is, here in this router, we configure, we just create plus. Yeah, so we have this, we just give a config name which is not required actually, and we give schema location. So this is the location of schema. We provide the schema location, and then we just click on OK. So now um, our GraphQL router is powerful enough to read the schema and map the incoming request according to that schema. If anything is going out of the schema validations and out of the schema, then it will fail. So this is kind of valid, and it is at the topmost level. It won't perform any exception handling, querying or anything like that to check if the data is a valid data or not, if the request is a valid request or not. It will just map the incoming request as per the schema. If it is inside, if it as per the schema, it will pass, and if it is not, it will directly throw a error at the topmost level. It won't go inside. So it is kind of a raml, which will validate everything. Raml will do the same thing, right? And it will give the location as well where it failed. So it's like line number 3 column 5, this.
So it will tell you where it went wrong.
Right.
Yeah, that's nice. So next is, how do we query on multiple schemas on multiple systems in the process layer?
Mm,
Not really sure.
okay, so yeah, so I mean, I'm not sure what was the question, but yeah, I'll try to figure it out. So this is an API gateway at the top. Let's say it's an experience layer, but below this there will be a process layer, and that process layer can be again a GraphQL gateway. So now this gateway will give a filtered data to this GraphQL gateway, and that this GraphQL gateway again will filter the incoming request and will send that to very specific APIs. It won't send to all the APIs. So we can have an hierarchy of GraphQL gateways wherein it is going to that extent wherein only the specific data is getting called in case of a big architecture. So if we develop a microservice in Spring Boot and we use GraphQL, then yes, there is a possibility that there will be a lot of services and there will be a lot of GraphQL gateways. And believe me, like in Java, GraphQL is very powerful. If somebody wants to implement that, you can implement all the functionalities of GraphQL listed here. All the functionalities can be possible in Java. And I think in the code section they have mentioned which for which language they have this library. So if you see here, it you name the language and it is there. So it has all the data, and they have examples as well, in Clojure how you use this, in this Go how you use this, in Erlang how you use this. So they have a variety of data present here.
Right. So if you go back to your that previous slide and where you had like a one GraphQL and multiple gateways there, where would
Yeah.
you configure schemas for each gateway? Is it like the one that is at the
No.
center, the API gateway level, or every one will have their own schemas?
Everyone will have their own schema, because if we have an API led architecture available, so assume that not only this gateway will call a different gateway, there can be n number of gateways. So every gateway will have to maintain their own schema, and that gateway will be for a very specific use. Let's say I'll give you an example. This gateway gives a filter of vehicles. Okay, these gateway will one of them will give filter of two wheelers, one of them will give filter of four wheelers, one of them will maybe filter of brands or something like that, or six wheelers or something like that. So this kind of filtration we can have. So this will filter, let's say this is a two wheeler, so it will go into the first sorry, the first API gateway. Now this API gateway will fetch the request and will see for of which brand it is. So now it will only call that brand web service which user wants. So it is that kind of a segregation. So each gateway will have to maintain their own schema. So it's like RAML. We have each one RAML for each API. So it's kind of that.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. Uh, Going back to the GraphQL configuration, the connector configuration. So, like, what
Yeah.
question is, what if the backing system APIs require authentication or authorization? How do you secure these things?
Right. So as I mentioned, it's an HTTP request. It's nothing more than that. Everything is inside that HTTP request. It's an implementation change. It's kind of a specification. It's not a technology or a method to code. It's just a specification. So here you see it's an HTTP API. It is nothing more than that. So whatever you can do with HTTP API, you can have policies. You can have client ID enforcement at the top. You can create a proxy out of it. You can have you can have this configured in DLBs, like dedicated load balancers. You can do whatever you want with an HTTP service. Treat it as an HTTP service, nothing more than that.
Okay.
So whatever you want to do, you can do without worrying about GraphQL.
So in this example, you have a router, and I assume that router is then gonna forward some calls to the following flow GraphQL
Right.
user, right? And it
Yeah.
has a GraphQL as a source. And then next is you are going to the database to get actually those fields, or you're hitting another API to.
I am hitting another API which I deployed. This is that API. I'll try to. So this is users API. So this will get only the user details. So yeah, I'm hitting in that architecture. So it is hitting an API. Again, here there is a post API. Here is a album API.
So basically, if I have some authentication required by that API, I would put that on the HTTP requester,
All right.
right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I think then that makes sense. It's
Yeah, so here you will pass in headers, you will pass client ID and client secret. You can do authentication. You can have OAuth 2.0 token bearer, everything.
yeah. Okay, so it's your typical non-graph specific thing, but
Right, right.
you will just follow your normal security configurations for the backend APIs.
Right.
Okay, that's cool. Let me scan if I missed any question. Uh, so before that, I think we started questions. So is there anything else on the code or anywhere you wanted to go through?
Uh, I mean, I just wanted to show, I mean, people who are from Java background, they can, understand this field resolver .java configuration. They can, actually download this from GitHub. You'll just have to search GraphQL router GitHub in Google. You'll get the first link there. um, and you'll see what is actually happening here, and we have loggers as well to to give some basic logic like on success, on error. There is one disadvantage of GraphQL that I think I missed to mention that. So one disadvantage is I think I cannot give a demo on that, but let's say GraphQL schema is passed, so GraphQL work is done, right? And after that, let's say HTTP endpoint failed. Now, as a as a normal API led connectivity approach, you will get a 400 error or 500 error or 404 error. But in GraphQL, you'll get an error message or everything, I mean payload and everything, but you'll get a error code as 200 always. I've not tried that, but that is a disadvantage of GraphQL. So here, if anything is failing, you'll get the details here, but here the status code will be 200 okay always.
Is it the example where you were showing something was wrong in the schema?
Now, so the thing is, if schema is wrong, it will directly show that the schema is wrong. But if it
Oh.
passes schema,
Mhm.
so if passes schema and then goes to implementation and then implementation breaks, then you'll get 200 always. So that is a bad thing. But I mean I hope from the payload body or something somewhere we can have a status code attached to it, and then at the end we can send it to the user.
All right.
We can do something here. I mean, before this router sends back the response, we can have a connector here, like let's say a set payload connector or something, wherein or a variable with HTTP status, and then assign that status. But I've not tried that. This is normal GraphQL disadvantage. It's not related to MuleSoft.
Yeah, it could be like a wrap your calls within try catch and then in catch get the
Right.
status something
Yeah.
like that,
Yeah.
right?
We can handle that in here, but yeah.
Okay, okay, that's cool. So I think is there any drawback or pain point using GraphQL, the one that you just mentioned? I think you already
Uh,
mentioned one. Is there any?
One more, yeah, one more is there. Caching is not out of the box in GraphQL. So, in normal REST, we will have options of, caching data, instead of hitting a request endpoint again and again and again, we can cache it that for a 24 hours or something like that at a TTL, something like that. But GraphQL won't come with that feature out of the box. But Mule is, very intelligent enough to add a TTL kind of architecture here. We can use something before this and in maybe inside this, or we can store that in object store or something like that.
Yeah. So how would it be if I add like a cache scope to my
Yeah.
API
Yes.
endpoint, right?
Yeah.
Then
We can do that.
yeah, even if not here within my that GraphQL user flow that you have at the bottom, uh,
Yeah.
before making an actual call to outbound API, we can drop a
Right.
scope. So
Right. We can do that.
it is something manageable then.
Yes. Yes. Mule is smart enough, strong enough to manage that. The
Okay.
only thing is the router is not very powerful yet. I think it will be soon, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think the fact of it not being on the exchange, it's like it's evolving. It's gonna have a lot of things coming in, probably
Right.
evolve, and it will have more features than what you are saying right now. I'm just
Right.
saying just because of the fact it's not on the exchange, right? So
Right.
it would be something really interesting to keep an eye on this one and see how it evolves, what all different things it brings into the picture.
Right.
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 Yeah, that's cool. Let me scan if I miss any other question. Uh, Guys, if I have missed your question in whole this chat history, please drop it back. I'm just reading from top to bottom now just to see if I have. So, yeah, one is there. It seems like the Mule flow processing time as well as the DB query performance will be same when GraphQL is used. It will intelligently filter the response from API based on client query. I think yes, you already mentioned that.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
I mean, it's not about only database. You can have SAP, Salesforce, anything which we query for different sort of data. We can have that connector here, so it will work normally. We don't need to have an HTTP connector always. We can have a file storage as well. We can just take a request from GraphQL user and just store that in file. We don't need to respond back with the data always. We can have a static data. We can define our schema in that way. So we can do that.
Yeah, I think I scanned all questions. What if we have not multiple system API and only one API,
Mhm.
but I have like thousands of attributes as a part of response, and my different consumer need say only 50 different attributes?
Mhm.
Would it be possible?
No, no, there is no use of having that. I mean, and we should not create such API wherein there will be 50 different kind of data. If you are saying that you have 50 an array of 50 data, then you just need a data wave to filter out data. You don't need a GraphQL resolver.
For that one. Okay. How would that be different? So in your example, you have a user object, right? And it has different attributes to it. And let's say that user schema
Mhm.
literally has like 1,000 attributes to one
Yeah,
user. And I
yeah,
don't want everything. I only want 50 attributes of user.
yeah,
I can do that by just giving the 50 attribute links list to GraphQL, right? Just give
yeah.
user and these 50 attributes of user.
Right. It won't improve the performance, but it can improve the connector. I mean, the number of connectors getting used. So I'll tell you why it won't improve the performance. The thing is, we take data and we send that to a request, but the request will give all the response that we have. I mean, we cannot filter at a request level that kind of a data. Let's say user request will only send will be sending 10 back in response. We only want one, but we cannot do that at a request level because we are not filtering data at a request level. Once we get all the 10 response, then we filter the data. So
Okay.
if it comes to one, hitting one API, the filtering will be on the Mule end, like in transform message, or I mean router will also be responsible. So if we get 10 data back, router will only give whatever it is requested. It won't give other data. So client would have to filter that data, but performance wise there will be no difference because we are fetching 10 data from the request from one API. GraphQL will perform better when there are multiple different API calls and we want to save hitting all these API calls.
Okay. 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 That's good. So about schemas, the question is, can the schema be represented visually? I imagine it means something like a visible instead of reading.
Like,
Are there any tools to see schema
mm,
better way? Or is
maybe I've not explored that much, but yeah, parsing schema it's very straightforward. So I think you want a structured graph kind of thing, or a hierarchy kind of thing for all the for all the schema variables, right? I've not tried that, to be very frank, but I think any parsing mechanism can create that. We can write a Java code, small Java code to create that as well, but I've not tried that.
okay.
There is no tool that I know.
Yeah, and maybe GraphQL being so open and so much, there may be something outside there which just they
Right,
found. Yeah. So
right.
one more is like, does it impact on the endpoint structure when we deploy in Cloud Hub?
No, no. So I deployed this in Cloud Hub as well, right?
What is running in Cloud Hub?
Yeah, so this is a working in Cloud Hub and this is working fine. So no change. It's just an HTTP request, HTTP endpoint deployed on Cloud Hub. So no change. Only the query. So let's say if we query ABC, instead of that, we are querying a complete request and then our API is resolving that. That's it. So it's like HTTP endpoint, normal, very basic.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah. No, instead of GraphQL, you don't need any other information to work on GraphQL. You don't have to change anything when it comes to MuleSoft, when it comes to deployment, when it comes to policies, when it comes to access. It won't change. Only the thing is you just need GraphQL connectors for a specification which GraphQL provides for query resolution. That's it.
Yeah, and I think it comes with a typical benefit of GraphQL to make responses lightweight. So
Right.
I'm using it for mobile. I don't need a full user profile. I just name its name, his name, and username. So that will
Right.
give the data that I'm sending back and forth between my mobile client and the
Yeah.
API. Right?
Yeah, so that's what is mentioned here. If you see, we have web app which will have more extensive list, but in mobile app we don't want that. We want to keep it lightweight, and then we have other services like Twitter handle and all. They just need some data or something like that. So they all can query a single endpoint, and they only fetch what they want.
Yeah. That's next is interesting. Is GraphQL an anti-REST pattern as it does not support REST operations? Get, post, put, delete.
It supports. So it's not a replacement of REST.
Yeah.
It's just a gateway. It's just a gateway on top of REST or SOAP or any other API, any API that you mention. It's just a gateway on top of that. But it can do get, post, put, delete. Not as of now. I just showed you all the get things, but yes. So GraphQL can do mutations is what is post and put. So you can, and delete can be also possible with mutations as well. We only send data and we just want it to be deleted. So mutations is one part. If it is enhanced in the connectors, we will be able to do all the operations, but it's definitely not a replacement of REST. It actually uses REST. So this is actually a REST API. If you see it, I mean, it's a REST API, and inside REST, we have used GraphQL specification.
All right. So one last time, can you show the XML, please, or the configuration of GraphQL connector, like
Mm,
router as well as the resolver? Like what are different attributes in there?
yeah, sure. Yeah, so we have module configurations. We send what is coming in. We obviously will get payload from there.
Do you want
Uh,
to expand that window, please? The
yeah,
router configuration, yeah.
yeah. There is nothing much there. I mean, I'm not sure what his expression is. Okay, so we it's no normal thing. In expression we provide the payload. In module configuration we provide schema. Here we provide the schema. Not sure why the config name is different, but yeah, I'm not sure where it is used. But yeah, we provide the location, and this internally will read all the schema mentioned, and the logic is here somewhere in Java code. But I used to be a Java developer. Now I'm not. So yeah, I'm not that good to read this stuff. But yeah, we can look into this.
But I think the configuration looks very simple. Just provide your schema in there and uh, where your input payload is gonna be, whether it's
Yeah,
in payload or it's something. I, I will imagine that inline thing will be for something if my input payload is on variables or attributes somewhere
right,
else. Then I,
right.
instead of saying expression, I will give like an inline and then pick up from there. Is that right?
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's where, I mean, we see inline in a lot of places, right, in MuleSoft. So it is for the same purpose. We can have a key value pair, and then we can pass something which will be accessed in the query resolver. So it is that kind of architecture. And one more thing. So I mean, even if the GraphQL evolves a lot of I mean, let's say 10 times, but this router configuration will always be very minimalistic. It won't change a lot because this router is for a very specific use and it will only serve that purpose. Now, the things will be, there will be a lot of connectors here to handle data, but all the connectors should be very straightforward and it's simple to use, I feel.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good thing. All right,
Yeah.
I think we are right on time. It's 2 minutes before the end time, and I don't think there are any more questions because I don't see them coming on the chat. Oh, as I say that, there are two right now. So probably let's take these two, and I think we can stop. So, can the GraphQL schema be somehow referenced in RAML so as to generate a flow with API Git router, opposing different resources and a GraphQL router?
Um, I I don't I don't know. I've not tried that, but as I mentioned, what you can do is on this HTTP request, you can create it as a RAML API. Do all the validations and all there, whatever you want, use client ID and client secret, everything you can do there. And when the request passes through RAML and it comes to router, we won't be able to use API kit router and this router at the same time. There can be only one. So API kit router will be in vain. So now the request will come to this router and this router will, take it over from there. But I feel if there is a validation at router level, we don't need a RAML for our API. But it depends on the requirement. RAML serves for a lot of purpose. You can have, required fields, client identity, client secret. You can have an structured way in RAML, so you can use that RAML for that. But let the query parameter come to router and then router take it over from there. So I doubt that the schema can be linked there. We can explore. Yeah.
Okay. Probably one last question. This is the last for sure. Do the clients have to send payload as the way you are showing in the UI? I mean, query language.
Yeah. So the client, I assume the clients will have their own UI or something, backend running in parallel. So they won't be able to send that request. But yes, they can send a request in body in this string format. So
Yeah.
it's just a representation here, just to simplify and to use it directly. We won't be using that in production environment or any environment. It will be linked. So the input request will be converted into a string. That's a simple job in MuleSoft, and then it will be sent as a query, as a body of the request, as a post. That's it.
Yeah. I think the use case for this would be typically on HTTP query parameter, there is a limit on the size, right? Like there's size limit, how much you can really put on the query parameters. In our edge case scenarios, if you run out of that limit, then it may be useful
Really.
to use like a post and then post your
What?
payload in there.
Yep.
Good
Right.
use cases. But I think, yeah, that was really good. We are 1 minute over
GraphQL
there.
tab as well. Yeah, there is a GraphQL tab in Postman. So GraphQL is supported by Postman as well. We can directly write that query here. I
It's
feel I'll try it, and I'm never trying it for the first time. We don't have any variables, and we'll send this.
yeah,
We'll get
it's
a response.
beta, so it's coming up everywhere.
Yeah. Yes.
All right, so I think we are right on the time, 2 minutes over actually. So
Mhm.
this was very interesting and very good discussion. Shivam, thank you very much for this one, and I hope everybody on the audience side also enjoyed it. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks for all the amazing questions. As usual, the one last request at the end of this one, you guys will receive a feedback emails. Please take some time to give us a feedback how it was, what you want to see, what you don't want to see, and anything that will be really helpful for us to know how we are doing. Thank you very much, Shivam, one more time. And I think, yeah,
Thanks, Manik, for giving me this opportunity to present, and thanks for all the questions. They all were interesting, and I was happy to answer them. I thought, I think I answered most of them. But if I miss something, I'll try to research on that and post that in some blog or something.
Yeah. So so I will send a recording link for this one, and when you are watching recording, the live chat replays, so you will always see the same discussion while you are
Right.
seeing the recording. So it's easy to go back and see. I can I have covered asked you every question from that chat, but if I have missed, you can always like
Sure.
send it back. And
Sure.
after this one, if you could, is it possible to share the link to slide and the GitHub code?
Code.
I,
Sure. I'll upload this code on GitHub and I'll share you the link. I'll keep it public so that everybody can download it and work on it.
Cool. I will send an email to all the RSVPs, all the attendees, so that they have the link to refer
Sure.
more. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good night, good evening, good rest of the day. Thanks, Shiva.
Thanks everyone. Thanks, Manik. Bye bye.
Bye.